Kairon had walked through the greatest libraries, devoured the most magnificent works, and debated with the sharpest minds of his era. He believed he had reached the very threshold of absolute knowledge, a place where no question remained unanswered. But there was one truth he never admitted to himself. Despite all his knowledge, he felt hollow, not because he lacked wisdom, but because he did not know what he was truly searching for. And then, one day, a letter appeared on his desk. No seal, no sender, just a single line. "You have reached the end of knowledge, but do you truly understand it?" Kairon frowned, studying the paper as if it contained some encrypted message. Was this a test of intellect? A riddle meant for him to solve? He turned it over again and again, but there was nothing else, only that one sentence. It wasn't a random question. It pierced straight into the weakness he had long tried to conceal. 2 days later, while he was still wrestling with the meaning of that mysterious message, a stranger appeared at his door. The man gave no name. He simply handed Kairon a smaller piece of paper. On it were written just 2 words: the mind's convergence. Kairon knew that name. The mind's convergence was not a place, it was a legend. People whispered of it as a sanctuary of pure wisdom, where the greatest minds gathered in pursuit of absolute perfection of thought. But that was supposed to be just a myth, a story passed among scholars, an unreachable ideal. After all, how could there exist a place where people lived outside the rules of society, devoted only to pure knowledge? The stranger looked at him, calm and steady, as if already knowing what Kairon would think. "If you truly want to know whether the mind's convergence exists, follow me." The instinct of a truth seeker told Kairon this was a moment he could not miss. Yet another part of him, his cold, logical side, wondered, was this a trick? A trap? Some secret experiment by a hidden group? Kairon did not believe in meaningless coincidences, but he did believe in meaningful chance. Some things appear not for us to understand instantly, but for us to choose. And he chose. He followed the stranger. They left the city at sunset, moving through streets Kairon had never seen before. From bright boulevards glowing with light, they drifted into narrow alleys, the hidden corners of a world he never thought existed. Soon they were beyond the city, entering a land that no map recorded. Through the long journey, the guide said nothing, and Kairon asked nothing. Answers didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was that he was being taken to the place he needed to reach. That night, he could not tell how far they had traveled. He only knew that when the first light of dawn broke, they stood before a gate. Yet it was no ordinary gate. Not wood, not stone. In fact, it didn't even look like a gate at all. It was just emptiness, a hollow space between 2 cliffs. And yet, when Kairon looked through it, he felt as if he were peering into an entirely different reality. The guide stopped and turned to him. "This is the point where people like you must decide. Once you step through, you cannot return the way you came." Kairon stayed silent. He didn't need further words. If this was a game, he had already accepted its rules from the very first moment. He stepped forward, and the world beyond the gate swallowed him whole. Kairon felt himself falling. No gravity, no direction, no sign that he still existed in any physical sense. But he did not panic. His mind worked like a flawless machine, even in the most extraordinary situations. He never believed in illusions, never believed in magic, and certainly not in any game that could break the laws of physics. The only thing he believed in was logic. If there was something Kairon could not understand, it was never because it was unknowable. It was only because he did not yet have enough data to explain it. And then his sense of falling ended, suddenly, as though space itself had decided he had arrived at the place he was meant to reach. He touched down on a stone floor. No impact, no shock, just a seamless shift of state. He found himself standing inside a vast chamber. 4 walls rose endlessly upward, their height immeasurable. There was no visible source of light, and yet everything could be seen, perfectly clear. In front of him sat 5 figures. They were perched on stone chairs, as though they had been there for 1,000 years. No one spoke their name. No one showed emotion. They were not people in the ordinary sense, but presences simply existing in that space, watching him with unreadable eyes. One of them, the one who seemed oldest, finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, heavy with time. "You have stepped through the gate, which means you are ready. But before you go any further, you must understand this. The path of illusion cannot be learned. It can only be left behind." Kairon frowned. A paradoxical statement, but not one he had never heard before. Ancient philosophers had once said that supreme wisdom was not about accumulating knowledge, but about stripping away the unnecessary. Yet if that was true, Why did the mind's convergence exist at all? If everything was only about letting go, then why was there a challenge to conquer in the first place? A second figure spoke. You think you came here to find answers, but what you will truly find are questions you never dared to face. A third voice followed. You believe knowledge is light, but have you ever asked yourself, can light itself become darkness? Then the fourth. You have reached the very edge of thought, but have you considered that thought itself may be the final barrier? The fifth figure remained silent. Kairon waited for a question, a statement, a challenge, but nothing came. The fifth simply looked at him. Not at him, but through him, as if every belief, every fear, every truth he had ever held had already been seen, long before he arrived. Kairon stood, waiting for some form of guidance, some clear instruction on what was expected of him. But there was nothing. No rules, no tests, no sign that this was a game by any conventional meaning. At last, he broke the silence himself. Then what must I do? The eldest figure slowly shook his head. We do not give answers, because we do not hold the answers. You must find them for yourself. But before you can begin, the voice said, answer one question. Do you truly know who you are? Kairon laughed. It sounded like such a basic, almost childish question, and yet he knew if it was asked here, in this place, it could not possibly be as simple as it appeared. I am Kairon, he replied. I am the one who has walked through the greatest systems of human knowledge. I have read, I have studied, I have thought my way to the edge of every concept. The third figure smiled faintly. Then if I strip all of that away, what remains of you? Kairon was about to answer, but the question cut off his thought like a blade. If there was no knowledge, no reasoning, none of the things he had studied, then what was he? A living body? An empty awareness? A nameless existence without definition? The silence stretched. At last, the fifth figure, the one who had spoken nothing until now, raised his voice. It was soft, yet it echoed as though the very walls carried the sound. You do not know who you are, and because of that, you are not ready to play. And everything vanished. Kairon was falling again, but this time he was no longer sure was he falling downward or falling into himself. He tumbled through an endless void, yet there was no panic, no fear of losing direction. He did not know where he was, but somehow it no longer mattered. What he had just heard, what he had just seen, made him realize something he had never faced before. He had never truly understood himself. If all his knowledge was stripped away, then what was he? If every concept he believed about the world was nothing but a shell, then where was his true essence? He had no time to chase the thought further. The space around him shifted. Shapes began to form. Images appeared, distorted reflections of something at once familiar and deeply strange. Before him stood a mirror. Not one mirror, but hundreds, thousands of shattered fragments, each reflecting a different version of himself. There was a young Kairon, full of ambition, eyes burning with the belief that knowledge was the key to everything. There was an old Kairon, weary, surrounded by hundreds of books, yet with empty eyes, as if he knew everything but no longer sought anything. There was a proud Kairon, standing at a lectern, looking down at those who listened to him as though he himself were the truth. And there was a broken Kairon, frail, hollow-eyed, wandering through the ruins of a civilization he once believed he could fully understand. They all stared at him. None spoke, yet he could feel something deeper than words, a silent questioning, a weight pressing against him, as though these other selves were waiting for him to act. He tried to move, but there was no exit, no path, only mirrors, only endless reflections of himself, stretching out into infinity. Then a voice, not from any of the mirrors, but from within his own mind. Who are you searching for? He did not reply. The voice pressed on. What is it you are trying to escape? Kairon clenched his teeth. This was not reality. This was only another trial, another trick of the game. He refused to be drawn into meaningless illusions. And then one of the reflections spoke. Kairon, are you certain you are not afraid? He spun around. It wasn't one of the distant versions of himself. It wasn't some distorted copy. It was him, exactly as he was now. You believe you can uncover the truth, but have you ever dared to ask what if truth does not exist? A chill raced down his spine. You believe yourself to be a sage, but what if everything you know is nothing but illusion? He wanted to dismiss it, to reject it, but he could not. You believe you control your own perception, but what if perception itself is your prison? His fists clenched tight. It felt as though everything was collapsing, as though the very foundation of his being was being ripped away from reality. The mirrors began to crack. The other versions of himself vanished, one by one, until only two remained, Kairon and the figure before him, his own reflection, staring back with eyes that held no doubt. He knew what had to happen. If this was truly the game, then there was only one way forward. Without hesitation, he stepped closer and drove his fist straight into the image of himself. The sound of shattering erupted, like a silent explosion. The fragments of glass fell, but instead of striking the ground, they dissolved into nothingness. Everything disappeared. Only darkness remained. And then a door opened. Not a physical door, but an opening, a hollow passage leading towards something beyond words. Another reality, a deeper layer of the game. Kairon knew he had to step through. And this time, he was no longer certain that he was still the same Kairon as before. He crossed the threshold. Or perhaps the threshold pulled him in. The world around him shifted instantly. No more darkness. No more mirrors. No more scattered fragments of himself. Now, he stood inside a colossal hall. The walls towered high, carved with thousands of characters, formulas, and symbols from civilizations he had studied throughout his life. Before him stretched a long stone table, and upon it rested a single riddle. No guides, no voices, no mysterious figures to speak this time. Only the riddle, waiting to be solved. Fill in the blank. What exists but cannot be grasped? What is understood but cannot be expressed? What is present everywhere, yet cannot be seen? Kairon read it once. A simple question. No, it could not be that simple. This was the game of the greatest minds. It would never offer him such an easy challenge. He scanned through the possibilities in his mind. Time? No. Time can be measured. Consciousness? No. Consciousness can be experienced. Nothingness? No. Nothingness cannot exist. He thought deeper, faster. This was more than a test of intellect. It was a trial of thought itself. If he approached it with pure logic, he would spiral endlessly into paradox. If he trusted only intuition, he risked being lost in ambiguity. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. What would happen if he could not answer? At that very moment, he felt the air around him change. The space itself seemed to close in, as though the riddle was not only inside his mind, but shaping the very reality of this place. And then a voice spoke. It came from no direction at all, but seemed to rise up from the stone beneath his feet. Do you not see? It is your own thinking that imprisons you. Kairon narrowed his eyes. He despised such philosophical paradoxes. Knowledge had to be systematic, structured, logical. But was that really true? He suddenly recalled the words of the shadowed masters he had met before. You believe knowledge is light, but you have never asked yourself, can light itself become darkness? And then he realized. He had been trapped, but not because the riddle was too difficult. Number. It was because he had believed that finding an answer was the most important thing. He had spent his entire life searching for truth. But he had never once asked himself, what if truth cannot be found? His hand touched the stone slab before him. His finger carved a single word into the empty space of the riddle. Nothing. Nothing can be grasped. Nothing can be expressed. Nothing can be seen. The moment the word nothing was etched into the stone, the entire chamber trembled. The symbols carved into the walls began to fade, as if the very foundation of knowledge he had once believed in was dissolving into nothingness. But he wasn't afraid. He stood there, silent, simply watching as everything around him collapsed. He had found the answer. But the more terrifying realization was this. He was no longer certain if he truly wanted to know it. A new doorway opened before him. No more stone. No more walls. Just emptiness, leading to something beyond imagination. This time, he didn't hesitate. Kairon stepped forward. And in that instant, he realized there was nothing to step onto. No ground. No sky. No foundation at all. And yet he still existed. He still moved. Reality was now nothing more than an invisible current flowing around him. He was suspended in a boundless white void. No light. No darkness. No sound. Not even silence. An absolute emptiness. But emptiness did not mean meaninglessness. Before him, a massive stone tablet emerged. As if it had always been there. waiting for him. On its surface, lines of text began to form, slowly, as though unseen hands were writing them into being. But the moment his eyes tried to focus, the words vanished. He blinked. He tried again. But no sentence remained long enough for him to hold on to. He attempted to remember what had just been there. But his memory was just as empty. It was as though every fragment of language was being erased the very moment it appeared. And then, a voice. Not from above. Not from below. Not from any direction at all. But from the very flow of reality itself. You have reached the end of knowledge. But have you ever asked yourself, if there were no words, would knowledge still exist? He froze. The question struck at the very core of his being. He had always believed that knowledge could be shared, that every concept could be explained, if only the right words were chosen. But what if words themselves were the barrier? What if the true essence of understanding could never be described, but only experienced? He reached out. His hand touched the cold surface of the stone. The sensation was real, undeniable. And yet, when he tried to carve even a single letter, the mark dissolved instantly, disappearing the very moment it was written. And then, another voice arose, softer, yet echoing everywhere at once. You believe you can reach truth by understanding it. But what if truth cannot be understood, only lived? He took a step back. A terrifying realization had just entered his mind. What if everything he had ever learned, ever known, ever believed, was nothing more than an artificial construct? What if every system of knowledge, every definition, every model humanity had ever created, were nothing but shapes drawn upon the surface of water? And the very instant you touch them, they vanish. He turned back to the stone tablet. There were no words left, no trace that anything had ever been written there. No questions, no answers, only absolute silence. And then, something inside him began to stretch, as though the entire machinery of his mind was being dismantled, layer by layer, piece by piece. No pain, no fear, but a quiet collapse, like a vast structure reaching the very edge of its limits. And for the first time in his life, he had no words left, no concepts to hold on to, no definitions with which to define himself. In that exact moment, the final door opened. No blinding light, no heavenly music, no glory of triumph, just a single step, and he took it. Kairon stepped through the door. But this time, there was no world waiting for him on the other side. Space itself was no longer a concept he could describe. There was no color, no form, no point of reference. He no longer felt gravity, no direction, not even the sense of his own existence as a separate being. There was nothing, and within that nothingness, he realized something truly terrifying. He no longer knew who he was, what his name was, where he had come from, or why he had ever existed. Everything he thought he knew about himself was swept away, like the disappearing words on the stone tablet, not because someone had taken it away, but because it had never been real. Knowledge, memory, identity, ambition, all of it were merely structures his mind had built to maintain the illusion of a self. And now, with nothing left to cling to, he stood face to face with the rawest reality of all. There had never truly been a Kairon. The instant this idea touched him, his entire perception shattered. Not in the way a body is torn apart, not in the way a mind is broken, but in the way an illusion vanishes when light strikes it. No screams, no panic, no one left to be afraid, nothing left to hold on to. And at that point, he saw everything, not with his eyes, not with his thoughts, but with something that could never be spoken. There was no observer and no observed, no subject, no object, no questions, no answers, only pure presence, unbound by any framework. And he understood. The so-called illusory path had never existed. There had never been a trial, never a gate, never teachers, never riddles. All of it had been a structure, designed only for him to walk through, so that he could dismantle what he once believed was real. And now, with nothing left to hold, nothing left to seek, he stood before the final choice. A choice lay before him, but not a choice that words could ever describe, because any description would only become another illusion. He could leave, Or he could return. But leave to where? Return to whom? When there is nothing left to define the self, is there truly anyone who can leave? Or anyone to return to? He didn't need to answer. Because in that instant, he already knew. And the moment he knew, the world came back. No glorious light. No miraculous rebirth. No sign that he had succeeded or become enlightened. Everything was simply as it had always been. He stood on a familiar road. The sky was still blue. The wind still moved. The world kept turning just as it always had. But something was different. There were no more questions. No one left to go looking for answers. Only an absolute silence within. A stillness he had never felt before. And so he walked. No destination. No purpose. Nothing to prove. Nothing to attain. Just walking. Kairon walked the same old streets, passed by familiar faces, listened to conversations he once would have joined. He saw people absorbed in the things they believed to be the most important truths of their lives. He felt no need to argue, no urge to prove he had gone further than them, because he knew no one goes further than anyone else. It is all just orbits, repetitions, endless cycles in a game that only ends when one grows tired of playing. He saw a man preaching a great ideology, believing its principles could free humanity from suffering. He saw another, rejecting everything, yet never realizing that rejection itself was another form of attachment. He saw one man praying, placing his faith in a power he had never seen, yet believed would guide him. And he saw others, versions of his younger self, those who trusted neither gods nor easy philosophies, but trusted in their own intellect instead, believing knowledge could shatter all illusions. But he knew now, they were all still playing the same game. It didn't matter what the players believed in. The essence of the game was to make each player believe there was something worth pursuing, whether knowledge, power, religion, or doubt. Different masks, same trap. And so they ran. They searched. They clung to what they thought was real, never once asking if any of it was truly necessary. Kairon wanted to tell them this game never existed, that every theory, every truth they chased was only another circle, another illusion, built to sustain itself. But he said nothing, because he knew no one can hear what they are not yet ready to understand. He simply stood and watched. Some noticed him, noticed the strange silence in his eyes. Some tried to pull him into their conversations, their debates, their attempts to convince him of what they believed was right. He only smiled, shook his head, and walked on. He had nothing to teach them, because truth cannot be taught. Anything that can be spoken, anything that can be written in books, anything that can be turned into a system of thought, is not the ultimate truth. Every philosophy, no matter how profound, is just a raft to cross the river. But if the traveler keeps holding on to the raft, even after reaching the other shore, then they never truly arrive anywhere. And he knew, as long as people still want to play, they will continue playing. Some will play all their lives. Some, like his former self, will believe they are close to the end, but in truth, are only entering another maze. A maze more subtle, more refined, but still a maze. And some, one day, will simply stop, not because they found the answer, but because they finally saw there was never a question to ask in the first place. Kairon continued walking. No purpose, no destination. But this time, he was no longer bound by anything. No one to guide him, and no one who truly needed guidance. Some people walk because they believe something awaits ahead. Some people stop because they believe they have understood everything. But the believer in pursuit is just as lost as the believer in stopping. In this work we call Heart's Knot. The name Kairon may mean nothing at all, or it may contain everything. It might be a marker of transformation, or only a shadow. And if even that name fades away, what remains? The so-called illusory path in this story was never a place, never a system of knowledge. It is only a state of mind, the state one falls into when they believe there is something to seek, an answer to grasp. But the more you try to grasp it, the more it dissolves. And when you let go of the search, you realize it had never existed. From the very beginning, the heart's knot is not a knot to be untied, not a mystery to be solved. It exists only so long as you believe you are bound. But who tied the knot, if not yourself? Perhaps you are still searching for something. Perhaps you believe you have found it. Or perhaps you have already realized there is nothing to seek, nothing to understand, nothing to escape from. And if all of this is nothing but a spiral you created for yourself, if there was never any binding in the first place, then is liberation truly necessary? If one final word must be spoken, then perhaps it is this: we wish you no wish at all.